My guests today are Aron Carlson and Kristin Arreglado Hurley, and they're here to talk about a parenting workshop that they have been developing.
So, just a bit about my background. I am a therapist in Portland, Maine. I have had a private practice for the last 20 years or so. And I had the privilege of, first and foremost, working as a family therapist. I did home based family preservation and I used to teach family therapy. I trained with Dr. Snarsh starting in 2011 and really have dedicated the latter part of my personal and professional life to really learning about interpersonal neurobiology and better understanding how we as parents and the ways in which we function and manage ourselves impacts our children. And so, as a mom of a 22-year-old, this topic that Aron and I have been uh, working together to develop a really high and meaningful experiential training is very near and dear to my heart. Aron, what would you like to share about?
Thank you. And what about you, Aron?
Hello, everybody. It's great to be with both of you. I'm looking forward to the discussion we're going to have. My name is Aron Carlson. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I work in the Washington, D.C. metro area. I've worked here for about 12 years, mostly with parents and their kids and also couples. And I trained with David Schnarch from 2018 to 2020. And that's where I met Kristin. And really looking forward to going through some material that Kristin and I put together to illustrate our thinking and approach to the workshop that we're going to be doing in the fall. And James has so graciously agreed to go along for the ride and discuss all this stuff with us.
I guess just as a broad statement, I think one of the most extraordinary things, but also incredibly difficult things, is parenting. And we wanted to start with a little vignette, we call it, an interaction that has a lot of material to it. And we wanted to start with the vignette because it's a more of a visual way to engage with the material that we're going to be presenting at our training. And so, Aron, would you be willing to read the vignette so we can all just start to take in what we're to think about?
You bet. Okay, so there's a family of three. Eliza and John have a daughter, Sophie, who's 5 years of age. Sophie attends a Montessori preschool, and the headmistress of the school, Miss Beth, sent Eliza, Sophie's mom, an email to report that there was a rug pulling incident at school. Upon receiving an email from Miss Beth, Eliza learned that the students were informed by one of the teachers that there was a pull in the rug and were explicitly asked not to pull on it, lest they create a hole in the carpet. Sophie was found by her teacher pulling on the carpet, and when the teacher asked Sophie to stop, she continued doing so and made a small hole in the carpet, which was discovered. And Eliza found herself surprised by the degree of reactivity and, from her point of view, intolerance, which the headmistress of the school, Miss Beth, demonstrated in her email describing her daughter's behavior. To Eliza's mind, what 5-year-old wouldn't be curious about what might happen if she pulled on the carpet? Sophie's dad, John, learns about this whole incident from his wife Eliza, who relays the email that she received from Miss Beth. And John becomes incensed upon learning of Sophie's behavior. He responds to Eliza by telling her what consequences he believes are appropriate for Sophie's disrespectful behavior. The couple's bedroom conversation turns conflictual as Eliza disagrees with John, and when Sophie comes into the room, John explodes. He tells Sophie, "Mom and I got into a fight because of the email that we received from Miss Beth about your decision to pull on the rug today, and now apparently there's a big hole in the carpet." Sophie bursts into tears. Eliza rushes over to comfort her, and John leaves the room.
So, if you just take a moment to really visualize, take into your mind's eye this series of events. Maybe you close your eyes for a moment and just allow the scenes to unfold in your mind's eye. How do you see 5-year-old Sophie as she's sitting in a circle with her classmates in her small Montessori classroom? Consider her thoughts and feelings and her responses as she listens to her teacher's instruction. The teacher points to the pull on the rug and explains that no one should touch it, as it could make a hole in the carpet. Next, visualize what Eliza, Sophie's mom's, thinking and feeling and considering when she reads the email, as well as what's happening for her as she informs John about Miss Beth's email. Allow yourself to visualize Eliza and John in their bedroom. What might be happening for each of them as they have their argument? What might their facial expressions and tone of voice convey? Let's visualize Sophie as she's entering her parents' bedroom. What might her facial expression look like? How close or far might she be standing to her parents, particularly when her father explodes? Visualize the way Eliza might engage with Sophie when she's in tears. How does John decide to leave the room? So it's pretty impactful for me when I really start to take in this interaction and really visualize the scene of what's unfolding. So if we think about this, and James, we certainly let's all have a conversation about this. What beliefs or anxieties could be impacting Eliza in the way she thinks about Sophie's behavior and anticipates interacting with John? How do you think she's feeling, both emotionally and in her body, and thinking when she's talking with her husband? And I'm curious how you see her functioning overall at that time. Yeah.
How Eliza was functioning?
What do you think was affecting Eliza, given the way she's thinking about her daughter's behavior?
So just my mind had gone straight to thinking about John and
Interesting.
Sophie and not Eliza. So I would suspect that she would anticipate this kind of response from John because it probably wouldn't be the first time, would be my guess. And so let's see, if I can place myself in her shoes there, she would have been anticipating that this might cause trouble, but maybe not fully anticipating the degree to which it's about to go off the rails. I'm not sure.
So perhaps she has some anticipatory anxiety is maybe what you're hypothesizing, given that it's likely this is not a one-off, and it's likely that she's seen her husband get really reactive in the past.
Yeah, I mean the pattern of behavior describing from John here is just not the kind of thing that happens only once. So I would expect that this is probably a pattern, especially John being willing to kind of take this out on Sophie. So
what's your sense about how she's feeling, how she's emotionally feeling, but then also physiologically, like in her body?
Oh yeah, so in her body, I would expect her to be, scared, shaky. Like if it were me, I would have a tightness in my chest, kind of anticipating the potential intensity that's about to come into the family system, and just probably not knowing how to handle it very well.
Any thoughts about what she's thinking about her daughter's behavior and how she's impacted when she learns about what happened at the Montessori preschool?
Yeah, she seems to be worried about how the school is treating her daughter. So, because she's worried about the tone of the email. You always said the intolerance, which with Miss Bess and maybe the teacher had. So, I think the way Eliza is looking at this is normal behavior for her daughter. It's not really that much to be concerned about. It's just the kind of thing that happens and you correct it. And that she's worried about how the school is handling it. And then obviously concerned about how John handles it, I imagine.
Aron, did you want to move into the second piece about John?
I'm happy to. I had the thought while James was talking that one of the things that I'm picturing is the concern that Eliza may have about a consistent message or a kind of alliance between the perspective of the headmistress and her husband, Sophie's dad, that this is punishable behavior and it needs to be punished. I'll segue to John. How do you think John is feeling emotionally and in his body and thinking when talking with Eliza? How do you see him functioning overall then?
He's not functioning well at all. And it's so interesting that this seems to be mostly about the conflict between him and Eliza. And So like when he complains about when he what he says to Sophie is about he's holding Sophie responsible for starting the fight between him and Eliza, which is obviously not true. But that seems to be his primary concern is what's going on between him and Eliza. And he seems to be using the situation with Sophie as a way to get back at Eliza.
I think a lot about the disrespectful behavior, and it's clear that this parent has the notion that if his daughter doesn't comply and misbehaves, it warrants a pretty strict intervention. And I think it's an interesting thing for parents to really think about when our children are behaving in ways that are disrespectful, or in a way where perhaps part of his reactivity is maybe about the what the school thinks about his daughter and thus about him. That's a really it's really quite clear in the way that he is so punitive with his daughter. And I agree. I think there's a lot happening between the couple.
So, James, did I get it right that you see John is reacting mostly to his wife when getting the news about the email from her? Did I get that
Yeah,
right?
so what I kind of see happening here is Eliza is taking Sophie's side in this, where she feels like Sophie has been, mistreated by the school, and she's concerned about it. And John enters the battle on the other side, and so John seems pretty eager to take whatever side Eliza is not taking. I mean, my suspicion is that a lot of his treatment of Sophie is driven by his desire to kind of make a move on Eliza.
Hmm. Um, do you have an idea of what he wants to make a move, what he might want to make a move on Eliza for?
I really don't know what his motivation for that might be, but it's kind of common things that happen in marriage where people are kind of out to get each other.
Okay. Yeah, I think it's a good thing to consider. If John looks like he's trying to make a move on Eliza for some reason, how his mind might do that. And I hadn't thought about it the way that you thought about it, so I'm not
Mm.
sure either. Um, but I can think of a possibility at the moment, which is, I mean, I don't know if this would be accurate, but the possibility that John wants to kind of make sure he prevails with how decisions get made, particularly in parenting, and if he's going to, if he doesn't like what he hears, he's immediately going to mobilize to try to get that position. I don't know
Mm.
how well supported it is, but it's a way of hypothesizing about the way that you see John.
The thing that stands out the most to me is just how he's willing to blame Sophie for the altercation between him and Eliza, where
Mm-hmm.
Sophie is obviously innocent, and he is just ready to just jump in there and say it's your fault. Not only did you, at this point, it's not even about the rug anymore. It's like, my behavior and mom's behavior is all your fault as the child, which is, it's just turning everything upside down, because Sophie is, whether or not she's innocent of pulling the rug, or whether or not that's a big deal or not, she's obviously not responsible for the way her parents are behaving. And that's what he presents. And so he moves it away from the rug entirely and says, now, what's happening in our family is your fault.
You
Yeah.
raise another point, and we're going to be getting into some of the teaching points later, but the idea that, there's a lot of looking at the couple, and to the extent that, you've spoken about having, Eliza having some anticipatory anxiety because she probably has a good sense about how her husband will respond to misbehavior. And so to the extent that she's anxious and she's concerned about her daughter, to what degree then does he know this about his wife? And he doubles down, and he's extremely punitive in the way that he reacts to his daughter. Most certainly. Um, did you have any other thoughts about John, Aaron, or James before we? Mhm.
I'd thought of the possibility that John is a kind of easily reactive, and news of his daughter behaving in the way described by the headmistress is a kind of an easy trigger for him, and he starts regressing in his functioning, And when he gets like that, he is starting to pound on his wife, and his daughter's an even easier target for him. And more than having any kind of ongoing agenda, he is just falling apart and trying to make it look like he's kind of in charge and knows what he's doing, and ends up in that process pinning the whole thing on his daughter and his. It doesn't say in the vignette explicitly, but I got to think that he's combative with his wife, and that's why their interaction is escalating to the point that, in all likelihood, their daughter hears
Right.
it, and then related to that, makes a decision to enter.
Which brings us to think about Sophie and what's happening for her as she's overhearing her parents' conflict. How might her father's interaction impact her thinking and her sense of herself? How do you think she's feeling emotionally and also in her body? And what do you think she's thinking when she decides to enter her parents' bedroom? What are people's thoughts about how this world is functioning here?
I think the tension between her parents is going to drive her into a survival response because, she as a 5-year old cannot survive alone. She needs her parents, and she needs her parents to be okay with each other. At least that's, kind of the way her brain sees it. And so I think she's going into the bedroom to try to calm things down. So she's taking upon herself the regulation of emotionality in the family instead of it being the parents' responsibility.
What are your thoughts about how the way that her dad engages with her impacts how she thinks about herself and her sense of herself?
Yeah, I mean, he presents himself as innocent and her as the problem, and so he's reinforcing in her brain this idea that I think children kind of already have a predilection towards this idea that my parents are basically innocent and I'm the one who's the problem, and her dad is obviously reinforcing this in her brain right now, and he's very comfortable painting himself as innocent and her as the problem.
Yeah, I would add to that. It looks like John is presenting himself innocent as an innocent victim of his daughter for causing this fight that's been hard on him.
Absolutely.
And I think that presentation impacts his Sophie's mind, in that all of this power is being attributed to her by her dad when her dad is pretty unstable.
I also think the idea about what's happening for her and how it is that she goes in to manage her parents is, if we think about that, it is upside down, isn't it? But that's what happens when children are experiencing, when they're witnessing interactions that would be potentially traumatizing and anxiety provoking. So we can surmise that that's a lot of, as you say, James, that she's going in to regulate the anxiety of the whole family system, and she's the child. That's likely what she's doing when she enters into the bedroom.
And children feel compelled to do that. For the parents, this is much less of a survival problem than it is
That's
for
right.
Sophie. But for Zoe, this is survival, and she feels like she needs her family to be okay for her to be okay, and she legitimately is in that position of dependency. And so it's pretty normal for children to take this. The idea of mom and dad are fighting, and the kid is trying to get them to stop. That happens all the time.
So a possibility occurred to me about Sophie where she may be feel like there's motivated to defend herself if she thinks that she's being unfairly talked about. Because I think there's a lot of ways that Sophie could play out entering the room. And since it's not a real person that we've interviewed, we don't have more specific things to base our speculation on. But I think that there could be some variety about what it means to her to hear her parents fighting. She's an only kid, and she's got to think that it's about her to some degree. And so I wonder how she sees herself reflected back to her, and how she handles that, along with the points that both of you have made about she's going to start feeling unstable to some degree the more she hears her parents reacting to each other. And that is likely to produce a response in her where she goes toward them.
And we can see based on the way that the mother engages with Sophie, then and James, you're really tracking the likelihood that there's somewhat of a maybe more of a combative kind of a relationship between the couple. So to the extent then that mother is going to comfort and reassure daughter, how does that impact the way that the husband engages with the daughter? So we see a bit of a triangle with the parents and the child. So there's a lot of dynamics at play in this one
Mhm.
vignette. And we can all really think about this 5-year-old and the degree of anxiety that, and also just that survival instinct, as you speak about, because it is very much something that young brains are very susceptible to safety. Well, we all are actually, but particularly younger children,
Mhm.
such as this 5-year-old.
The way I think about it is when there's tension between the parents, it's like a live wire being run through the children, because the tension almost always gets routed through the children when parents aren't handling themselves well. And the children have a much lower capacity for anxiety tolerance than the adults do. And so it affects them even more. It's really, really hard on kids when mom and dad aren't doing well.
Yes. I want to just knit back to
Mm-hmm.
something that was addressed before about this father, and that is he clearly has the belief that children are just expected to follow rules. And he does take it personally by virtue of the fact that he gets as reactive as he does when he finds out that she was doing something she wasn't supposed to. So we can also think about how that impacts this child, knowing that her father, if she's doing something likely, she was curious. This is a an interesting thing we haven't really talked a lot yet about that what's happening in the classroom. But if we visualize a group of 5-year-olds who are being told, whatever you do, don't touch this. Of course, they're going to be curious about touch. What is the this, right? It's not really behavior that we wouldn't expect from 5-year-olds. And yet, we can see of this father's mind that it is somewhat of a personal affront to him. And he has a lot of, he invokes a lot of, I call it parental privilege, the privilege that he gets to teach her a lesson, but again, not handling himself well at all.
Yeah, he's very focused on his daughter as the problem, and is very deliberate in the state of mind he's in to characterize her that way, and wants her to know. I think that all of those features support that he's pretty reactive. Um, so okay, so we kind of covered the next one. Um, there's some questions about how the couple's relationship works. So, how do you picture Eliza and John interacting around making decisions about how to engage with their daughter about these events, and also responding to Miss Beth's email? And then there's kind of an epilogue question to that. Do you need or do you see a general picture of how Eliza and John may make decisions together, or don't you?
It gives me a pretty clear picture of John. I don't see Eliza very clearly. I don't know how Eliza would. All I can see from Eliza is that she doesn't think her daughter is being treated justly, by John or by the school. And but as far as otherwise, I don't see much about her. But it does seem that John would be a very difficult person to deal with in any disagreement.
And we get a flavor for the difficulty that these two people likely have in interacting with each other. We can see that Eliza was quite, concerned when she read the email. Her mind goes to how is her husband going to respond? So again, not this is not a one-off, right? And we can see she has she's surprised by the response of the school. She also clearly is anticipating that there will be a conflict, and it really does unfold in pretty tumultuous way. So, and we can also see, given the position that John takes, he really isn't collaborating with anyone. He's so reactive. He doesn't demonstrate a lot of capacity to have real flexibility in the way that he's thinking, or a real openness either to his wife, given that he just gets so reactive and very punitive. And even it really kind of implants this crazy picture, this big hole in the carpet, which doesn't demonstrate a lot of capacity for there to be real collaboration happening between this couple. Aaron, do you have thoughts you'd like to add?
When I picture the couple having their talk in their bedroom, and there's not a lot of specific detail in the vignette about that, I'm imagining what it means to Eliza inform John about what happened at school with the anticipation of his response that she has. And I wonder what it means to John to that his daughter was doing something she was told not to do at the school. And from that point, I wonder how they respond to each other, but my guess is they get more reactive. What their kind of meanings are that internally that contribute to their reactivity is something we don't know. That would be something to unpack in a therapy session or several. And but I think it's pretty clear they don't agree on how to handle talking to their daughter about this. And it looks well supported that Eliza wants to treat some of the meaning she makes out of this is that her daughter's kind of being normal, and it's the school that's out of hand. And some of the meaning that her husband is making out of this is that her daughter's the problem, and the school's probably doing a good job to inform them and shouldn't be inconvenienced, or the school has a right to have their daughter's behavior corrected with the help of the parents in the environment of the school. And the couple does not agree about this, and it's pretty unclear as to how they play that out in their interaction. But they don't get anywhere constructive, and it escalates. But I wonder about how they experience interacting with each other, and what leads them to, in the kind of recursive loop, escalate together. So I don't see them being able to do any kind of collaborative talking with Sophie about this until either of them can find a way to get a hold of themselves enough while interacting with the other one. And if they don't do that, which wouldn't be uncommon, my guess is that they may not be able to talk to Sophie together, and she may get different messages from her parents in passing about what this means and what's going to happen. Or maybe not in passing, maybe one or both of them would sit down and talk with her. But what they'll say, I gotta think, is likely to be kind of uncoordinated and unsupported and running a risk of having contradiction in it. And I don't think that would be unusual in any of our family systems for that to happen. But I think playing out that way would increase the kind of confusion and anxiety that Sophie's likely to live with around this series of events and kind of in general.
I definitely see it increasing Sophie's anxiety, especially her seeing that mom and dad can't handle themselves, and her capacity to handle herself well is obviously much lower. And so I would think this would lead to quite a bit of a problem for Sophie.
I think the last piece we wanted to just reflect on with respect to the vignette was kind of what we're already talking about. Just what if we as we continue to look at the way the parents are interacting, how this affects Sophie and the way she thinks about herself and about each of her parents, and also what she's gleaning about her sense of safety and connection and relationship based on how these parents relate with each other and with her. So we've already started to speak into this, that obviously this creates a lot of anxiety for this young person, and a lot of anticipatory anxiety, as well as the way she thinks about herself and her behavior, knowing that she has a really reactive, punitive father. Those are just to summarize some of the things that each of you has spoken into. Does either of you have any other thoughts that you'd like to share on this last reflection question?
What I'm thinking about is how Sophie sees her mom, and I think that it's not a real clear. It's at least not for me. It's not a real clear picture, and I think there's a lot of information that, in an actual case, would want to get before being able to have a more precise view of it. But how her how Eliza responds to John's kind of pretty acute regressive pressure on their daughter, and how she handles herself when he's upset like that, I got to think is informing her daughter's picture of her. And that could go a lot of ways. And so I don't think it's clear here, but some of the issues would be about is what's it like in this marriage for Eliza to talk with John about, if she's concerned, any concerns that she has about his reactivity, that she can, well, it's not clear, but there's a chance that she can see that her husband's aiming that at her daughter. And what's it like for her to consider putting that on the table in a conversation with him, and how would she do it? I think those are all important things to consider in terms of thinking about how Sophie's impacted by how this family system works and how she sees her parents. There may be ways where Sophie is supported by her dad that we don't see in this vignette, but we can certainly see where she's going to be at risk for getting throttled by him. And then her mom takes a role of protecting her, which I think is pretty understandable. But then also, how do the parents, acknowledge this in any way in their relationship? My thinking is they'd have to, as a kind of prerequisite, for them to be able to do something different with how they care for their daughter.
Well, this puts Eliza in a really tough place where realistically, Eliza is going to have to do something to protect Sophie from this. And it's a really hard thing to do. But this is when you end up as a parent, I have a huge responsibility to my children. I also love and care about the person I'm married to, or that I had children with. And now what do I do when I'm faced with this thing where I need to talk to you about how you treated our child? Incredibly difficult conversation. Takes a lot of courage.
It does, and I think
Sure
certainly
does.
we can have a lot of empathy for this mother and this father and this daughter. Moving into some of the key points that we've spoken around, one of the big things that we'll be teaching and talking about in the workshop that Aron and I are offering in November is about differentiation as it relates to the way that each of we as parents are able to so we can see, certainly particularly with John, that he really doesn't have he doesn't demonstrate good capacity to quiet his mind down and calm his heart. He doesn't respond to his daughter or we don't see as much with how he responds to Eliza, but he certainly doesn't respond in a grounded way to Sophie, but he's really reactive. And he doesn't have a lot of flexibility in himself, given that his way or the highway, right? He really is pretty brittle in terms of the way that he thinks about his daughter's behavior and the way that he engages with his daughter. So the differentiation involves the ability to be solid in ourselves, but also flexible to be able to recognize where another person's coming from, being able to self-soothe and self-regulate. So that's one of the key points that we certainly think critical for us as parents. So that's a really important piece that we'll be getting into in our workshop.
I would add to that, on Eliza's side, what happens to her when her husband doesn't see things the way that she sees them, and when she anticipates he's going to become kind of explosive, what happens for her then? That would be, I think, a test of her level of resilience as a parent, which is differentiation based. And that's when all of us run into our limits of resilience and differentiation in our important relationships. But those are the areas that these parents would, I think, do well to consider their own process internally and what they know about their partner's mind and how they interact with each other as a focal point, particularly when their minds are likely to identify their daughter as the main problem or intervention point. Not that there isn't reason for considering intervention, the daughter to be an intervention point, but that it's difficult but possible to hold at the same time how is the parent seeing what's happening in the interaction with the child, and separate that from how they're feeling and what's going on with them, so that there's a possibility that they can make at some point, maybe not in the interaction, but a best or better judgment decision that has to do with the child's needs separate from the parent's felt experience. That's part of the, I think, developmental challenge that everybody goes or everybody runs into, and the vignette that we described is meant to illustrate that, without knowing the particulars of the minds of each parent, but knowing enough about them and their situation to have a kind of working conversation like we are.
We've been talking about what each person is mapping of each other, and that is, the brain's innate ability to create a mental picture of another person's mind, including how they think and feel, what they know, and what they want. So mind mapping is a really key skill that allows people to predict what another person is going to do. So we can see of young Sophie that she's likely experienced traumatic mind mapping, given that she sees her dad so reactive and she hears the parents in conflict. Likely, our hypotheses were that that's why she's entering into the room. And you can imagine that we all kind of visualize what her face looked like. She probably had a look of fear and anxiety because of the way that she was impacted. So it's an important thing to consider when we're interacting both with each other and with our children. I hear a lot of parents say, "Well, I don't think she knows what's going on because we didn't have the conversation in front of her." But there's so much that our children are mapping of us, and the things that they're mapping of us can really be impactful. So this is another piece that we want to talk more, we will be talking much more about in our workshop. But I think the vignette gives us a real flavor for thinking about what this child is, what prompts her to enter into the bedroom. And as you said, James, it's likely because she's going in to manage her parents' anxiety. She knows there's conflict happening.
Yeah, and I'd add in turn her own
For sure.
anxiety.
We spoke about a term earlier. I introduced the term of co-construction to the extent in this vignette that John is punitive in the way that he responds to Sophie. Eliza rushes in to protect. And it's really interesting to think about the way that, to the extent that this is happening here, it impacts this other person here, and also in family systems. It's pretty endemic. We co-construct each other. And so again, the more that we are able to be settled and managing ourselves, the more resilient we are as parents, and the more our children will develop to resilience.
I call that relational wealth. It's like if I passed $1 million on to my kids, that would be one thing. But if I pass on to them the ability to love and be loved, that's even more
Yeah.
valuable.
I think one of the most loving things we can do is to really get a handle on ourselves as individuals, and certainly as parents. But boy, it's really hard when there's so many things that are pressuring us, right? We have so many agendas going on. The idea that we need to try to impart things with our children or to keep them safe, or certainly so many other factors going on. We'll be talking a lot about issues of self as it affects us and our parenting at the training that we'll be doing in November. Um, also, it's interesting to think a lot of think about self-soothing and what actually is involved. because I think you can see how, I bet if we were able to hook these 3 family members up to heart rate variability machine monitors, everybody would be having stress responses. So the idea of how do we self-soothe? How do we monitor our physiology? How do we get out of our heads when we're getting overwhelmed and we can't think very clearly because we're so affected by our emotions? Being able to learn how to really soothe and calm ourselves and quiet ourselves is a really, really key thing for us to know how to do. I think it's not necessarily intuitive, particularly when we're interacting in situations that create a lot of stress.
That's where I think the kind of most common challenge with this phenomenon is you're going to be in the worst shape to know what's happening to you and to work with yourself when, if you can do that, it would have the maximum amount of benefit for you and your kids. But the way that it comes to us is you're going to be in bad shape first.
So if I were in this kind of conflict with my wife, I would, I think about it in 2 different ways. There's like self-soothing where like I have some time. So maybe I go out and I go for a run, or I go for a walk. That's like one type of self-soothing, but the other type is just self-soothing in the moment. So can I handle myself and calm myself down without interrupting the conversation? And one thing, I'm always learning new things, but the thing that I've been really working with this month is I try to feel 2 different things at the same time. And so like 2 different textures with my hands, like one hand on my shirt, another hand on my hair or something like that. And there's something about connecting with physical reality that helps me calm myself down, because in the physical world, I actually am okay. And it's in this world of ideas where all my anxiety lies, because my wife isn't really a threat to me. Like, she's okay. I mean, she disagrees and she disapproves, but physically I'm still okay. And so by making contact with the physical world, even like touching the desk or touching my pants or something, there's something really calming about that for me.
One of the things that I think is useful to consider is the difficulty of questioning the picture of reality your mind is putting together when you're reactionary, and to consider that how you're feeling and what you're seeing may not be reliable for making accurate sense out of what's happening around you or even inside. But to be able to go, wait a minute, maybe what I'm feeling right now and what I'm seeing isn't as reliable as I think. I think that's a very difficult thing to be able to do, and kind of the beginning of the approach that Kristin and I are offering, in terms of to be able to function differently in situations where you have somewhat of a predictable response pattern as a parent. The internal process that you're experiencing has got to be unpacked and identified more specifically to the point where you can see somewhat of what's happening and question it yourself. And after that point, I think, is when the more kind of straightforward self-soothing practices are most helpful. Breathing, movement, texture, touch, that kind of stuff. Because a lot of the times we don't know how far off we are. And it's not going to occur to us that we've lost our mind temporarily. And if we don't do something, we're probably not going to get it back before we say or do something that makes things kind of unworkable at the moment.
Yes, I think you're talking about the ability to take a third view. We talk a lot about being a fly in the wall, but it is a very difficult thing if you don't recognize you're underwater and your thinking is terrible and you're so susceptible to your emotions. So we'll certainly be talking about this term, regression, in the workshop that we'll be offering in the fall. And also just the importance of being able to confront ourselves, really being able to have a resilient, collaborative relationship as parents. It begins and ends with self-confrontation, being able to do it in a meaningful way so that, parenting can be really demanding, but being able to have flexibility so that we can come back and do really meaningful repair is one of the biggest gifts, more than that $1 million that we might have to give our children, I think, for sure. Um, so, so do you have any other thoughts about what we have or haven't covered, James? Questions for us?
No, I think it's fantastic. This has been a journey for me. I have four children, and I've been on a journey the last few years of repairing relationships with my adult children who kind of suffered under my lack of understanding of these things that I've been learning recently. So I'm a firm believer. The things we want in the world are to love and be loved, and we want our children to thrive. And so what you two are offering is a ticket to that third part, is what can I do as a parent that will make it much more likely that my children will thrive? And there's few things that are more important to most parents than that.
It's a ticket by way of whatever you need to go through in your own process. So that's one of the things that I think is important to consider, that you don't know what it's going to require, and you don't know how long it's going to take to be able to function better in the same situations where you're having difficulty, usually for understandable reasons. And that's part of the anxiety tolerance demand that's on a parent. But what I've learned from working with parents and kids is that kids don't need their parents to be perfect. And it really means a lot to them most of the time to see the parent effort to try to get themselves together when it's clear to both of them that the parent isn't together. And that really seems to impact child functioning a lot. And so we all kind of have to make messes and run into the closed doors of our limitations to be able to open them and thrive. But it's not a clean, kind of easy thing. It's tough, and it's uncomfortable,
I
not for
love
the
what
faint
you
of
just
heart.
said. It's very hopeful. I think about a statement that Dr. Snarch made. We were at a workshop and he said, I bet you'd love to hear the secret about parenting. So we all had our pens. We were ready to write. It's not that you won't mess it up. It's your capacity to see it, to step back, to see it, and to do meaningful repair. Whew. It's not that we won't mess it up, but it is certainly we're ahead of the game when we recognize you're probably in worse shape than you think you are. That's a great way to approach parenting. Um, and again, I think we bring a lot of heart and compassion to the training. It's a privilege to be able to do this work. And we really appreciate you inviting us to join you today, James.
Tell me a little bit more about the format of the training. You said it's going to be a 2-day online event, and there's going to be interaction. And I mean, what is it going to look like?
It's broken down into 4 or 5 topics. Kristin has mentioned the names of the topics: differentiation, mind mapping, also called theory of mind, regression, traumatic mind mapping, and repair. That's basically the topics. And there is some background information about what those things are and where they come from, intertwined with vignettes, interactive exercises, questions posed to the group, getting feedback from group members about their experiences with some of these topics in their own lives, and also videos that illustrate the kind of interactions that we've described in our vignettes. So we'll be able to play interactions between parents and kids, and then see, sort of similar to what we did tonight, what those viewing put together, and unpack that a little bit and note some of the variety of interpretation and meaning, and also physiological and emotional response to them. And then help connect that with concerns that parent participants have in their own parenting lives. So we do the topics in kind of a developmental order. starting on day one. And by the end of the second day, we're mostly focused on what have you learned about what happens for you, and what are your thoughts about how to operationalize this at this point. So we try to make it very experiential, with some kind of groundedness in the research that's been done in the field that supports this, and also to support the parent participants in being able to construct a third view or a new point of view of their own parenting.
Sounds amazing. I love the idea of having the interaction and being able to do the vignettes together.
So it will be very, very experiential and also interactional, much like we've been able to do here this evening. It's really been a lot of fun to just share ideas and reflect together and look a bit more deeply at this one little vignette that we've put together.
So I will put a link to this workshop in the show notes, and anyone is welcome to attend. It's going to be over 2 days in early November. And I also will add links to Kristin, your website, and Aron's website, and then people can reach out to you if they have any questions. Is there anything else you'd like to leave people with?
I hope what we discussed is meaningful to you all and struck a chord, and let us know if so. And thanks for putting this together and having us on, James. It's fun talking
It
with you
was such
about
a
it.
pleasure. Yeah, it's such a pleasure to talk to both of you. And I am so grateful for the work you're doing. It's so important. It's so important.
We're happy to answer questions that you might have just based on anything we have or haven't covered this evening. So I just want to put that out there as well. Happy to be a resource if we've still stimulated some food for thought, and we'd be happy to respond to those questions if you have any.
Excellent. Yeah, I will include links to your website, so I'm sure
Yes,
people can contact you if they need to. And I look forward to seeing you
great.
both again soon.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, James.
All right. Bye.